Hello, everyone, and welcome to Intro to Angular. I'm hoping that we can come out of this with a better understanding of what single-page applications are, kind of like what the problem that Angular solves is. Probably won't be able to do anything especially new, but hopefully you're a little bit clearer on what SPAs are all about. So, to that end, let's talk SPAs. So an SPA, or single page application, is a technique that I'm going to throw this back to like 2002, 2003, somewhere in there. It was a technique to make websites more like applications. So the single pageness of it doesn't actually refer to like how many like different screens there are in the application. It's not like a simple sort of thing. It refers to that there's only one HTML file that gets loaded, and everything else that changes in the app is taking stuff out of the DOM and putting stuff in the DOM, rather than fetching a new page and having your browser re-render it all from scratch. So if in a normal app, we have a client, or a normal website, we have a client and a server, and I go, hey, give me an HTML file, and then it gives me some HTML back. So get index.html. And then if I click a link, it goes, hey, give me about.html. And then it gives me back the HTML for that page, and my browser renders it. So that's the traditional way of doing websites. The way an SPA works is starts the same. Your client makes a request to a file server and goes, hey, give me index.html. And then it gets that back. Everything after that, though, is no longer like requesting HTML files. Most of the time, we have an API server, like the Pokemon API or whatever, and it's requesting data and getting back stuff like JSON. And then your browser is using this data to make new DOM elements, take other DOM elements out of the page, swap stuff out. And so the difference is that this transaction is super slow, relatively speaking. Like requesting an entire extra HTML file, bring it back. You'll see like kind of a flicker, like it'll pause. Your browser will pause for a second while it's doing that request, and then loads the next thing. The application style thing, we want those changes immediate. They're all being handled by JavaScript, and to the extent that they need data that we don't have, well, we just ask for that data as we need it. That is the general principle behind single-page apps. So you go to the LMS, you request one HTML file. The main job of that HTML file is to link to the JavaScript file, that huge JavaScript file. It has the entire framework. It has all of the logic for how we take stuff out of the page, how we put stuff into the page, how we modify stuff, when we request data. So all that stuff comes in through here, and then your browser is just JavaScripting everything from that point on. So that's like That's the philosophical difference between these two things. Why don't you ask me some questions about it?
So if everything's going to be dynamically rendered throughout the single page application, does
Mm-hmm.
this mean that we're going to be seeing a lot of techniques of like blowing out the inner HTML elements? Or
So, in single page applications, using the frameworks, you never touch the DOM stuff. There's no inner HTML, there's no text content, there's no query selector, there's no any of that stuff when we're using an SPA framework. It handles all of that for us.
sweet.
But yeah, philosophically, what's happening, if I were to just like write it out, SPA ripoff, I would make like an index.html and an index.js. In my index.html, I scaffold out a page. I link to the JavaScript file, defer the load, and then I might have one container here with an ID, and then that's like all the HTML. Might also have like the other required elements like the title, character set, your meta render thing, all that sort of stuff. Okay, so then like this would be all of the HTML, and then in the index.js, you might say, all right, the home page is all this HTML here, and maybe it's got a navigation okay, so maybe that's the home page, and then maybe there's like an about page. Whatever else. So we grab a reference to the app. And we say, all right, whenever this loads, I want to set the inner HTML of app to homepage. And then I want to, I don't know, attach an event listener that's like look up the thing that has an href of, what is it, about? Notice that those aren't valid links. They don't have to be. So I say, all right, find the one with the about href and add an event listener to it for click that prevents the actual navigation and then sets app.innerHTML to the about page. And then maybe like also adds that event listener back in where, let's see if this one is about products, contacts. If I had a products page, then I might do this same thing where it's like, all right, grab the href products, add an event listener for clicking that. Event.prevent default. Etc. This is not very elegant. Just trying to illustrate the general concept. If I serve this up, you get these things. I'm on the home page right now. Remember, the actual HTML file didn't have any of this. The HTML file was just an empty div. We see this stuff because JavaScript added it in. And when I click that, it navigates me to this page. And then if I click the products, I screwed up the event listener on that. But like that's the general idea. That's SPAs. All of the like DOM stuff is just handled by JavaScript. Ask me some questions about that.
So the only advantage to this is that it makes it quicker. The response is quicker.
It makes it feel quicker to the user. We're really like just shuffling around where the fast and slow parts are a little bit. But from the user's perspective, it's the difference between going to a website and clicking on links and stuff to like using a phone app. It should feel more like the phone app than it should like clicking around a website.
Is this where all or most web pages are headed if they're not already there? Or
this is a super good question. It depends on whether or not they're sites or applications. So like most like just purely informational things, think like a band website or like a lot of that kind of stuff. There are advantages to doing it this way, especially like if you have to hit a really wide range of audiences. Because that like speed thing, for example, one of the trade-offs is this is medium first load and medium nth load after that. So like when you request an HTML file, like it's just whatever size that HTML file and all of its assets and stuff are. And every single link you click is completely independent of all the other ones. And so they all end up being about the same. This one is way different. So when you go to your first page here, it's a slow first load because you need to download half the internet, getting like that JavaScript that manages all of your navigation and has all the templates and all that kind of stuff. And then every like load after that is fast. So there's actually like plenty of cases where this might be a more attractive trade-off than this. For example, purely informational site, and you are dealing with users who are on metered connections. So like they pay per like kilobyte or megabyte that they download. That's a lot of Africa. That's a lot of the Middle East. And so having them download half the internet on the first load because they just wanted to find out something simple, that's slow on a lot of devices, and this like extra benefit might not actually be that much of a benefit to them. So then this strategy might be better. All that said, like 80% of the web is and probably should move to more of this kind of thing. The LMS is a pretty egregious example, but let me see if I can find an example of like a good static site. Like, let's see, what about one of your Pokemon apps? So, all right, Matt, is this deployed? Yeah. So this is like a pure static page. Let's take a look at what actually gets pulled down here. Okay, so all of the assets for this thing, 7K, 75K, 5K, 9K. That was the size of all these assets. When you click around just about any website, like absent images or video or anything else, you expect to see something like that. Even like my site, which has like a fair amount of that stuff. Let me try that again. Ah. Stop it. All right. So like, that's not nothing, especially like there's a video file somewhere in here that's pretty sizey. And like the picture for that's a megabyte, that's probably too big. So that's about what we're looking at on my site. This video embed stuff, God, that's half a megabyte. That's pretty big. And this like YouTube embed thing, it's almost 2 megs. That's pretty big too. I gotta shrink these pictures down. Come on, man. So that's like static stuff. By contrast, let's check out the LMS, especially mine. Good gravy. So just that one JavaScript file was like 1.5 megabytes. And then, let's see, where's the... Yeah, and then almost another megabyte just for the data for that. Like, that's a lot. And this one, like, there's no images or anything on this. There's one, I guess. That's the kind of trade-off that we're looking at. Great question. Other questions about SPAs in general?
So your website just has one JavaScript file?
My website doesn't actually have...
Or the LMS, sorry.
The LMS does, yeah.
So does it get more... Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No,
but does
you're
it get more complicated to just have one mega JavaScript file or to have, 10 different ones for 10 different pages?
So here's the wild thing. I don't write that as one JavaScript file. my build process, like when I run npm run build, that turns everything into one JavaScript file. Because the overhead of making a lot of requests, that's a bottleneck. We want to reduce that as much as possible. So it's smarter to bundle all that up into one file. Because like
Okay.
it doesn't give you more bandwidth if you split it up into more things. So if your download speed is 1 megabit a second or whatever, and you split that up across 2 files, you haven't sped anything up, but you have added the overhead of managing 2 separate requests. So they try to like combine all of your CSS into one file and all of your JavaScript into one file. All the frameworks do that. Other questions? So this is a massive pain in the ass to do by hand. Can't disrecommend it enough. Luckily, we have all these tools that help us build apps this way that do all the hard work for us. The most popular one, probably by an order of magnitude, is React. Actually, we can spot check that. The last Stack Overflow survey. So this is something you should probably get used to looking at every year. But this is like a rundown of what people in the industry are doing. So 83,000 responses, that's a pretty good sample size. And so, yeah, this is most popular from a languages standpoint. Hey, there we go. Not bad. So there we go. Not quite an order of magnitude, but React's the most popular. Oh God, this hurts my soul. Every one of these jQuery things is like ancient stuff. jQuery, like there's been no reason to use jQuery for like 7 years now. Express is a Node server framework, and hey, there's Angular with Vue right behind it. So React, Angular, and Vue are definitely the most popular tools for this. Oh, is Ember even still on the list? No, sad. Angular JS, this is a heads up. Anytime you see that, that's old Angular. That got discontinued like 7 years ago also. This is sometimes referred to as Angular 1. This is sometimes referred to as Angular 2 Plus. This is the one that we're learning. Oh, who's that? Oh, that's Efren. See if there's other... Hey, what do you know? Just about everybody uses Git. Hey, VS Code. It's almost like you guys are learning popular stuff. Vim's holding out there for something that was designed 50 years ago. Not doing too bad. Most dreaded or loved versus dreaded. Most people love TypeScript. Yeah, not universal though. Anyway, so these are our main tools. There was also one that I got a big soft spot for called Ember. I ran the Ember meetup in Denver for 3 years. It is not very popular anymore. For no good reason. It was super good. And I would say that the main difference, all four of these have pretty much the same approach overall. They're all component based. They all do data down, actions up. Like architecturally, they have way more in common than they don't. I would put them on a continuum of opinionation. An opinionated framework is one where there's only one right way to do something. An unopinionated framework is one where there's a lot of right ways to do something. So opinionated stuff tends to be harder to learn, easier to use. Unopinionated stuff tends to be easier to learn, harder to use. So at one end of the spectrum, the unopinionated side, that's React. It's possible to make good React apps. I think it is more difficult to make good React apps because it has no opinions about anything. That leaves all the hard work to you. And then on the other end of the spectrum was Ember, where there's only one right way to do anything. But if you can figure out what those right ways are, you get all the hard stuff out of the box for free. I would say the geometric average of all SPA frameworks is Vue. And I would put Angular about here. Another thing that's kind of interesting about these different SPA frameworks is learning your first one is pretty difficult. Learning your second one is sort of a nothing burger. So my first one was Ember. My second one was Vue. And like I picked up Vue in a weekend. I picked up React in an afternoon after that. And Angular, yeah, kind of the same thing. It's the same ideas in all of these. They even use the same words for them most of the time. So these ideas translate pretty well. So even though we're doing Angular in this program, if you end up joining a React team, it's not like starting over from scratch. It's all the same stuff. Questions about the framework landscape in the year of our Lord 2022?
Since they're all pretty much the same, there's not going to be certain applications like Spotify only uses Ember and Ford is only going to use Angular. We can really say that it's up to the team.
Yeah, like there are teams, especially in enterprises, that like want a shared investment in technology. So like React code, actually I was going to say isn't interoperable with Angular code, but even that's not 100% true anymore. But like generally speaking, it is difficult to reuse code from one and another. And so a big team might want everybody on the same SPA framework so that they can kind of share resources. But there is no problem that can only be solved in one of these. They all do the exact same thing.
Great. Awesome.
This goes along with just opinionated stuff in general, but like stuff that's more opinionated tends to be easier to do simple stuff with or common things. So like if you're making a web application that shows things from an API and allows you to edit them and add new ones and that sort of stuff, Ember is like and Angular and the more opinionated stuff, you're gonna have a much easier time doing that sort of stuff. As you start getting into weirder and weirder things, like Spotify, I guess would be a good example, where like you're building an interactive media player, React is probably a little bit easier to do something like that in. But like that's not true across the board. Like Beatport is one of like the weirdest apps like I can imagine, where it's like half Spotify, half like DJ rig. That was an Ember app. Originally, I don't know what it is now. It might still be. But, yeah. Also, these four things started out way farther away than they ended up. Vue was kind of last of the game, but once upon a time, Ember was here, and Angular was here, and React was here, and they had three wildly incompatible philosophies. And like there was we call them the framework wars. This is like around 2016, 2017. There were so many also rans. You'll see Backbone and Knockout and Moo Tools, and there was like a different one every week, and almost all of them just died out. Over time, these have converged to where like architecturally, Angular's probably the weirdest one, but the difference between any of them is just very small at this point. And I think it's because they started ripping each other off. They're like, oh, the way that Ember does this is super smart. I actually see all kinds of things in Angular that were directly taken from Ember. Like the router and the CLI tools, they're not even just similar to Ember. It's literally a fork of the code. And React's major contribution to SPA land was this thing called unidirectional data flow. We'll talk about another day. That turned out to be like crazy efficient, and so now everybody does that. And so over like the last better part of a decade, the differences between all of them shrunk a lot. Other questions about the framework landscape? All right, active learning time. Why don't you head on over to Inbox? All right, questions out. Describe the difference between SPAs and websites in your own words. Let's take about 3 minutes on this. Go for it. Keep him coming. Looking good. All right, pencils down. Send me what you got. All right, each of these answers is better than the last. I think you all kind of get the concept of SPAs. So let's start talking about Angular in particular. So with Angular in particular, ng is a Google product, which, by the by, React is Facebook, Angular is Google, Ember is independent, but anymore it's mostly Microsoft. LinkedIn is the largest Ember app. Vue is still totally independent. But hey, there you go. And that's actually the case with a lot of these like cool hip open source libraries, like Bootstrap, the CSS framework. It's a Twitter product. A lot of these things are stuff that these big companies developed internally, and then to both get a ton of free work on them and hit a lot more use cases and generate goodwill with the community, they open source that. But Angular is a Google product. Its first version was called Angular.js. That does not exist anymore, which is like the usage numbers on that are appalling. This has been discontinued for a very long time. Sometimes this is called Angular 1. Angular is what we call everything after that, so like 2 and onward. They're not otherwise related, though. Angular 2 was a complete rewrite of the framework, uses completely different philosophy. Like, there's no upgrade path from one to the other. So I feel like it was a little bit disingenuous to reuse the same name and use the same versioning scheme. But whatever, it's what they did. And I would say that Angular, more than any of the other ones, is probably the most object-oriented friendly, and probably the most just JavaScript, or really just TypeScript. All the other frameworks allow TS. And most of them are written internally in TypeScript. With Angular, you're required to use TypeScript. There's no non-TypeScript version of Angular. You can do just JavaScript and Vue and Ember and React. And so I feel like Angular probably has the fewest number of things that are like Angular specific, and otherwise just uses a ton of direct TypeScript features. So that's a little bit more about Angular in general. Let's see what it looks like to build an Angular app. I would not recommend following along with this part, but you can observe and take notes. There we go. Is that already in there? Yeah, it's already in there. Okay, so the way that we make a new Angular project is with a generator command. So this is npx at angular/CLI. You don't have to have already ever used this before. If you don't have it installed already, it'll install it for you. We're going to give it the new command, and then we're going to give it a name for the project. So when I fire that off, I think it's going to ask me a couple questions. Would I like to add routing? No, thank you. Which style sheet format would I like to use? So here's like, these are the equivalent of like TypeScript, but for CSS. How about just CSS? And then it just made all of these files, and it's installing all the NPM packages, and it's doing all of the things needed to scaffold out this app. Oh, that's where this VS Code stuff keeps coming from. That makes sense.
Is the install just assuming that you're going to be using VS Code here?
No, like, it's popular enough that I think this doesn't hurt you if you're not using it, but since a lot of people are, you get a whole bunch of benefits out of the box with that.
Nice.
All right, cool. Some things worth pointing out about this. It did editor setup for me. It set up Git for me. It set up a testing framework. So all of that, like, how do I get ES modules to work? And like all of that is just worked out. You get all that for free, nothing special. So if I go and do some Angular project 2, okay, so I can take a look at my package.json file and see what they gave me. And I got a start script and a build script and a watch script and all sorts of stuff. So I want to do this start script. So I'm going to npm start. Yep. All right, I'm going to npm start. And it's going to build out this app. It's going to bundle all this stuff together. It's going to do all the stuff that Parcel was doing for us. And it's a little slow the first time it does it, but it gets quicker. But holy crap, generated 2.5 megs of file. Okay, so now if I go to localhost 4200, that's an Angular app right there. And if I go to the app component HTML file, that's all of the stuff you see on the page. Get out of my face. And it's gone. If I say I want to just write some HTML, there it is. So that is an awful lot of stuff that we got out of the box, just totally for free, wired up and ready to go for us. And that's how you start an Angular app. The main thing in every Angular app, Angular has I would say 3 main concepts: components, modules, and services. we are going to mostly focus on components for right now. You'll end up doing plenty with modules and services over the next couple weeks, but components, that's the bread and butter of any SPA. Angular is no exception. The easiest way to think of a component is it's a custom HTML tag. It's a surprisingly durable metaphor. But let's say I had something like a header. And it had this H1, and it had a nav, and it had all these links and stuff. Okay, so what if I want to turn that header into its own component? I could say, yo, Angular, generate a component called app header. Oh, come on, man. Yo, Angular, generate me an app header component. And so what it did was it made all of the files for me, the HTML file, the CSS file, a TypeScript file, a test file, all of it. So if I go over to the app header component HTML file, I can copy paste all this in here. And now if I want to use all of that as if that HTML were in here. Oh, is it going to make me app header it? That sucks. All right. There it is. Custom HTML tag. Let's say that like those links were variable. So like that's an array of links. This app component, I can say, hey, I want to check out the app component's TS file. Hey, it's a class. So I could do something like links is an array of objects that are like label, like that. So now this class has this property on it. I can access that in the template. So if I go over here and say, I would like that app header component to take in some links. And I want them to be these links on the component here. And then on my app header component, I can say, hey, this takes an input of links, and maybe I make a link type that has a, what do we call it, label and a URL. I can say that it takes an input of links, it's an array of links. All right, what's it mad about? Oop, I need to invoke it. starts as an empty array. All right, cool. So I can say that this thing is expecting to be given an array of links. And then in the HTML for this app header component, I can say something like, for every link in links, is it in? Is it of? I think it's in. I want this to be link.label. Maybe it was link of links. Nope. G4 link of links. I thought that was it. Let me check the syntax real quick. As you're about to learn, I'm pretty new at Angular, so we're going to be learning some of this stuff together. Angular duration. Oh, no, that's the JavaScript part. Oh, my God. No, not object keys. OBS makes my computer super slow. Nope. Templates. Okay, it is of. So ng4 let link of links. That has to be a whole statement. There we go. And there we go. I've iterated through this. So starting from the top, in this app component, which is like sort of the top level one, that has a child of the unfortunately named app header. This has links, and then I pass them in to this one. So I declare the links on the app component. In the template for the app component, I pass those links into this app header. The app header is looking for those links here, and then in its template can iterate over them and make me an li tag for every one of these. That's like 80% of Angular in 10 minutes.
What if you have different pages that have different links? I mean, would it be
Sure.
hard to create another?
No, not at all. So let's say that, let's make another component. ng generate component some other component. Makes all those files for me. And so let's say I had those links, and then I also had something that was just the first two links. I don't know why. So maybe that's get first two links. And that's return this dot links dot slice 0, 2. So over here in this thing, I could do app some other component, and its links are going to be first two links like that. And if I head over to some other component's TypeScript file, I can import input. I can say that it has an input of links, and I can say that they are of type link, and they initialize to an empty array. It's going to go, all right, what's a link? Sorry, that needs to go here. And then in the template for this, I could maybe do the same sort of thing and iterate over those. Like that. Oops, that is let link in links. And now back over here, let's figure out what's happening. To ng4, and since it isn't a known property of that link of links, and that should be let link of links. There you go. One of the components did all four of them. Another component did just two of them.
Now, where does your doc type and title and all of the required information go on your page?
Great question. So in Angular, so this is the root folder. We have this source directory. There's the index.html file right there. That is the only HTML used in the entire document. It's got this little container right here that everything else just sort of hangs off of.
So the custom HTML elements themselves, they're not in the HTML, right? On the actual file, like on the actual website, I mean.
What do you mean?
Like the custom element you created, like app header.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when the page is rendered, those HTML elements aren't rendered, right? There's no HTML element called app header in your.
Exactly. What it does is it looks into this app header thing. It's like I copy and pasted it in there instead.
Okay.
So like if we element inspect this, it adds like some of these hey, we saw this when we were like poking around sites and stuff, all these like kind of nonsense tags that you didn't add. Angular needs that to keep track of these things, but otherwise, oh, and hey, Angular does put those in there. That's weird. Oh wow, React and Vue and Ember don't do that. Cool. But yeah, inside of those is all the HTML tags.
So technically, wouldn't this not be semantic since, app header is not a semantic element, or doesn't it really matter?
So you get around that by like there's other things on this that will like take it out of the accessibility thing, and so you can maintain your accessibility and stuff that way.
Okay.
So Kyle, I'm sorry, I'm confused on something. You said that the index HTML is the only one we'll use, but looking in Vim here, we're in app.component.html. How is it different?
What a great question. Let's take a look. So if I go to the network inspector on this, hey browser, which HTML documents did you load? Oh, just this one. These are instructions to the framework, but like this ultimately goes into JavaScript. This ends up working exactly the same as this. What was it? SPA ripoff. Those HTML files are basically this. They have HTML extensions on them, which like really helps your text editor not lose its mind. See how there's like no syntax highlighting on any of this? By giving this an HTML extension, like sort of helps your browser, but that's not any different than one of these.
And so also noticing that what we're doing here is we're taking a bunch of different components or even functions, if we wanted to say it, and we're really dicing them up and separating them out. What's the benefit of that over having one JS file that contains everything you could possibly dynamically render onto the page?
Sure. So, I mean, the biggest advantage of not doing that is that would be one hell of a big file. Be very difficult to find much of anything in. To give you a hint of what that might be like, let's go to one of my files that's too big. It currently causes me no end of woe. Oh, this monstrosity. This is split up into a bunch of different things. And it's still 243 stupid lines long. It is so hard to find shit in here. Absolute nightmare, man. So, yeah, being able to split these up into multiple files, godsend.
I see. Thank you.
How would you add an image in the alt text for an image in Angular?
So it's still just also HTML. We can think of this more or less like one of the same superset thing that we talked about with TypeScript, where, and this isn't 100% true, but it may as well be. We have HTML, and then we have like Angular HTML. It's a superset. So you can still do like cute corgi. And grab that image and So just because we can use custom elements doesn't mean that we can't use normal elements. We can also use those. We just also have ones that we can use to abstract stuff out. And that becomes really handy. Like, think about when you were working on multiple page sites and you're like, oh man, I have to like type out this header every single time on the page. And if I change it on one of them, there's like 5 other places I need to change that stuff. This gives you one source of truth for what that is. So if I change something about the header, it's already reflected everywhere that element is getting used. That's pretty nice. Also, like when you make a component, it gives you like a CSS file for that too. That's a place for CSS that's specific for that component. That's a way easier way to organize this than like having 1,000 line long CSS file for like everything that the app could ever be. You can make CSS that's like targeted only for that component. Makes your CSS way easier to manage.
There's also an app CSS that's generated too, right? So
That's
what
for
would you use
global
that
stuff.
for? Okay.
So things like app. I don't think it is that one. Styles.css. So this is for stuff that will apply to like everything. So if I was like setting Google fonts, I can do that thing here and say, all right, the default typeface for everything is Nanito with a fallback to sans serif. And now that's available in all of my components.
Sorry, one more question.
Yeah.
And does specificity carry over to the individual like pages? Like if you wanted to have a component with a different font, would it be able to override it?
Always. Now, specificity does work a little bit different in Angular. And I'll show you how. Okay, so if I go to app component CSS and say something like, let's see, class app component. So over here I could do like app component, font family, cursive. I think that was it, trying to do cursive. Let me do just serif. Yeah, so now these are all serif because they overrode whatever the default type is. And if you look at the actual styles that are being applied, this one here. If you take a look at this, that's why it has all those like little garbage things that we didn't add. They're called fingerprints. And so it is getting the class that I specified in the style sheet and further narrowing it down to elements that have that attribute. you'll notice that everything in app component has that ng content lmpc13, that like kind of randomly generated thing. Every one of these elements has that, except for the stuff that's inside another component, and those have a different one. So these ones are 11, and this one's 13, and this one's 13, and this one's 13. And so it ties each style to a specific component that way. And so like this actually can't target anything that isn't part of the app component, which I think is actually a pain in the ass personally, but most people find that easier to work with.
So do you have to add it to each of your CSS pages if you have that in multiple places, or does the main CSS cover all pages?
So the main CSS, this one that's in styles.css, that applies to everything. And you can target things with specific classes. You can do all that stuff here, and every component can see these styles. The component-specific styles are scoped specifically to that component. Other questions about this? So your first goal in Angular is a project that I'm really fond of. I've actually taught this one a bunch of times, and I think it works pretty well. But it is called WineFlix. So this is the first time I've done it in Angular, but I've done it in React and Vue and Ember, believe it or not. And this one works like this. Yes, please.
Kid time.
Okay, so on 35.111, WineFlix. His Royal Majesty is back. Here's the page. It's modeled after what Netflix's homepage used to look like. And it's got all these things here. But this is it. Like, none of these go anywhere or do anything. If you look at the actual code for it, though, the entire thing is just one giant-ass hard-coded thing of HTML. All the styles are taken care of. You don't need to do any of the styles. What you need to do is break this thing up into components. And that means you need to figure out which things should be components, how small to make them. Also, there's a lot of stuff that's repeated. Like, each of these probably doesn't need to be its own component. Or like a different component. They're kind of the same component. But some of them are further along than other ones. Some of the links are different. Some of them have different classes. And so you'll have to use the things that you learn about Angular to turn this into something that's been split up into at least 10 components. I've seen people go way further than that and turn this into like 20 components. That's fine too. There's no like exact right answer to this. But you're trying to take this one giant component and split it up into at least 10 smaller ones and figure out how you pass data into them, so that like each of these should probably be one component, but some of them are active and some of them aren't. And so hopefully between the stuff in the LMS, which is intentionally very sparse, I really want you to lean more on the Angular documentation for this. But you should be able to figure out how to break this into smaller pieces. To give you a benchmark on time, it takes most people who've never done any SPA work about a week to like comfortably do the WineFlix thing. I think some of you will maybe do that faster. Some of you might take a little longer on that. But like when I do just general corporate trainings on this, and people have never done anything more than like just JavaScript and jQuery, it takes about a week to get up to speed on it. So if you want like an internal benchmark, you're like, why can't I figure this out? Like my normal trainings, that's about how long it takes. Questions? SPAs, comparative frameworks, components. All right, I hope that gives you something to go off of. Go learn something.